it or not, upon initially discovering Feminist Frequency videos, I had high hopes. I love science fiction. I love TV tropes. I like media reviews. I've even read Bitch Magazine before. Things were pretty much stacked in her favor. And then I watched a video. The first Feminist Frequency video I watched was called Caprica and the Queerness of Samadama. I had seen the series in its entirety and had been a bit disappointed over its cancellation, but also somewhat disappointed in the show itself. I was of the opinion that in a show of mostly unlikable characters, Samadama was arguably one of the only likable characters in the show. The fact that he was an openly gay mobster was a somewhat novel element to the show, and I was interested in hearing what another viewer thought.
No. He chooses to use two very large, very phallic knives. On the other hand, he's kind of crazy and he's a murderer. Just when I want to celebrate a genuine accomplishment of Hollywood, they have to go make the queer man disturbingly evil.
Anita's judgments of Sam seemed premature, and her argument was overreaching. With hopes beginning to fade, I decided to watch a few more of her videos, particularly ones where I was familiar with the media in question. It was a frustrating experience. I had my disagreements, and then I saw this.
Remember back in the mid-90s on the X-Files when FBI agent Dana Scully found herself abducted and forcibly impregnated, which of course later culminated in a hybrid human-alien child?
The X-Files? Now it's war. And so I decided to go through her videos and make a series of responses challenging some of her examples in the way she often argues. Feminist Frequency used to have on her channel that her critiques were from a fangirl perspective, and what I imagined for the series of responses was something like the epic war of fanboy versus fangirl. I even thought of uploading them to a different channel which I have, which is more geared towards reviews of things like television shows and movies. Anita apparently studied media and social sciences, which forms the background of her videos. I, on the other hand, studied philosophy, which means I tend to focus on things like the structure of people's arguments. Her videos also brought up some interesting issues about the relationship between media and society, but often more interesting were the things that she did not talk about. Her conclusions were sometimes not as well supported by her argument as she seems to think, and she sometimes overreaches and argues fallaciously. But before I ran out to make my video responses, I decided to watch video responses to Feminist Frequency to avoid being redundant. At that point, which was the fall of 2011, there were several people that made interesting responses, most notably Going Rampant, who did a long series of videos examining Dollhouse. Good points were raised, but none of them were the points that I had in mind. I should stress here that when I first went on the hunt for video responses, they were by far intelligent and civil. After making some outlines for responses, I put the idea on the back burner for quite a while. Arguing over television shows and comic books just isn't my highest priority in life, but I eventually did decide to check back in on things, and that's when the plot took a dramatic twist. In the time since I had last looked, there had been a flood of new video responses. As I looked through them, it became clear that the spark for most of these new responses was her Kickstarter project.
In this particular project, which I'm calling Tropes vs. Women in Video Games, I'm going to create a series of 5 videos that look at and deconstruct the most common and the most stereotypical representations of women in games.
While some simply expounded conspiracy theories about Anita, it became apparent that it was now open season on Feminist Frequency. Many people openly despised her, mostly for what she represented in their mind rather than the things that she said. For quite a while now, I've been noticing a growing anti-feminist brigade on the internet. Feminist Frequency became a tangible target for people to hurl their cliche arguments about castrating feminazis at. But as I watched through this new wave of video responses, I began to notice that the people responding all circled back to the same arguments. There was an identifiable groupthink to it. This new rash of responses also put me in something of a dilemma because it changed the context in which I would be responding to Feminist Frequency if I went forward with my own series of videos. To make a series of video responses criticizing Feminist Frequency, I would in some sense be enabling the haters, most of whom I find quite vile. On the other hand, in spite of all the new responses, my points remained untouched. In fact, what was most striking about these replies is that they seemed to constantly talk around what Feminist Frequency was saying, or just flippantly dismiss it. Rather, what was on display were typical examples of YouTube's increasingly pathetic ponage culture, as opposed to carefully thought out responses. So what I decided to do was create a second series I call Tropes versus Feminist Frequency, in which I will address the most common arguments made in video responses to Feminist Frequency. An alternative title to this series would be Stock Arguments Against Feminism. Now, I have to warn people up front that some of the montages of clips I use in this series might become a bit tedious. I deliberately made it this way in order to let people see the sort of groupthink for themselves. A commenter of mine once said, "Personally, I have come to the conclusion that rubbing my face in piles of broken glass is more insightful and productive than listening to what the internet has to say about gender politics." And to that, I think that identifying and addressing some of the groupthink on the issue might have a small impact on the productiveness of the discussion. Seeing the way which some people react to Feminist Frequency also put her project in video style into perspective, and so in addition to the responses I originally planned, I decided to do a few more videos on some of my overall thoughts on her channel. So in short, what I've done is make a series of videos giving a critique of Feminist Frequency and another series of videos addressing common responses to her. It's been quite a while since I made a video series like this, and I have to say, I think this far surpasses my past efforts. Enjoy.